Hey everyone, I'm here with Laura Nalbandian, my friend and colleague in evolutionary astrology. We are gathering here today to have a conversation about Laura and her past in EA, and she's one of our wonderful presenters in the conference coming up in October, early October, the 6th through the 8th, our first online evolutionary astrology conference. Before we get into the topic of what she wants to share with you all in October, hello, Laura. Welcome.
Hello.
We wanted to go back to the beginning. Kristin wanted to go back to the beginning because it was a very special beginning. And Laura, you were so young when it happened. So that means you've been around for the longest of anybody on this team of astrologers that we have in October. You are the true veteran.
Well, yeah, I was there from the beginning of him showing up in our lives. So, yeah.
Jeff Green knocked on Astrology et al.'s door back in 1976. Oh my goodness, August 15th, 1976, 47 years ago. And the store was closed. It was a Sunday. It was the exact day of his Saturn return to the minute. I remember way back when him talking about this. And so we did generate a chart on that. But your mom, Maggie, was inside working, even though the store was closed. And he's waving at her, knocking on the door. And she lets him in the store. And they recognize each other. They recognize each other because he says they were in the last life that he had together when he was a Native American boy. And she was his mother. So I wanted to share this wonderful picture of the two of them, Laura's mom and Jeffrey Wolf Green, the founder of evolutionary astrology. You can see the connection between these two. And where was this, Laura? Do you remember where this picture was taken?
This was taken at a hotel in Renton. It was one of the last few Washington State astrological events that Mom organized. I was there. Everybody from our bookstore was there, all the folks that worked there and friends of Jeffrey's, Char Rayner, Sharon Glantz, my first husband, Darby, was there, and Aaron Sullivan was there, Joanne Wickenberg, David Pond, I believe his sister Lucy was there. So it was a small conference that she put on in the name of WASA, the Washington State Astrological Association.
Well, that's a beautiful image, and you can see the love that they share between the two. He always spoke so highly of her. He just had so much love for your mom, and she really gave him his start. They were talking astrology a bit, and he was finding his way and receiving downloads in astrology. Actually, the major download, I think, wasn't until a year after he met her. And he just started doing charts after receiving all this information downloaded into his consciousness through dream by Yukastwar. And the way that he describes it was that the pages were just being, turning pages, like turning pages in a book in dream, Yukastwar, page after page, the Pluto book was shown to him. And so Maggie Nalbandian gave Jeff Green his start, and this is where he did his readings in Astrology et al. It's really where it all started, where it all happened for many, many years. And you were a teenager, right?
Yeah, I was 17. This picture would have been taken, I'm trying to think of the year. Norwalk was started in 84. This might have been 81 or 82. Yeah, it would have been, yes, it would have been the early 80s. And I do remember the stories. I do remember that time. He looked very different. He walked in, as Mom tells the story, I wasn't there. He was in his army fatigues or his military fatigues, military boots. He had his big long hair. And if I'm not mistaken, he may have had a beard and mustache in the very beginning.
Yeah, a beard and a mustache. That's what he said.
Yeah. And it's surprising that Mom would have opened the door on a Sunday to someone.
Yeah, right.
right? To open the
Uh-huh.
door like that. And the story goes that he had been checking out the different bookstores and being rejected for the way he looked. You know, he looked like what we might have called back then a hippie. And, you know, even though this was the university district, which was much more progressive, and mom being progressive, but she just had a feeling, is what she had. And so she went with that feeling. And as we know, it was the beginning of their renewed relationship, certainly from a karmic point of view. And he began his work. And after a bit, again, I don't remember the time frame. If he says it was about a year in terms of the information for the Pluto book that came through, at some point he did start teaching it. And so I do remember that. I was not in his very first classes, just to be clear. I knew him at 17. He did a reading for me. I was working in the bookstore. And I left the bookstore in 78. The story goes, my father fired me because he said I was too comfortable working in the bookstore and I wasn't finding my way in the world. So he fired me to go out in the world and find my way. And I ended up coming back in 83 after working out in the world and developing skills, being a bookkeeper for a large accounting firm and so on, and came back to the bookstore with my daughter, who was born in 83. And I began my astrological education, true astrological education, in 83.
So you had a lot of options within the store of studies and different teachers or lectures at different conferences. You could have gone in any direction with your astrology work and study.
Well, I would say that is possibly true. You know, we had lots of people in and out, but no one teaching classes on a regular basis except for Mom and Jeffrey. I will say that I came back to the bookstore to be the manager of the bookstore. I had no particular interest in being an astrologer. What led me to study was a very Capricorn Earth reason, which was, if I was going to be the manager of an astrological metaphysical bookstore, I really needed to know something about the topic of astrology. I had been reading metaphysical books of all kinds since I was 16 when the bookstore opened. So I had a comfortability with metaphysics, spirituality of many different types, but astrology kind of eluded me. My brain didn't seem geared toward it. And so I started with Mom, and then went to Jeffrey's class. And frankly, as I've always said, it was harder than I thought, or maybe it was as hard as I knew it was. So I quit. And then she cajoled me to go back, and I went back and I quit again. And then she cajoled me back again. And this was all within the span of that year of 1983. And something clicked with it. And I developed, an obsession for it. And I had at my disposal every book under the sun of astrology, read lots of them, but I think that there was only one path for me, Kristin. I really do. It brings up a lot of emotion thinking about it, but I really do think there was only one path. Not that I looked at every other path and said, no, evolutionary astrology is for me. It was like a lodestone. It was like metal filings to a magnet. That was the path I went to, and it spoke to me. So, through the many years, 35, 40 years of being around astrology, make it almost 50 years. It's not quite, it's like 47 years since Jeffrey walked in. But anyway, being around that since I was 16, being around astrology, and then being around evolutionary astrology, it's just, that was the path for me. I wasn't committed to being an astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, I consider myself a reluctant astrologer, but the universe just shoved me at every key crossroad. It shoved me. In fact, during that time frame, not 83, but as I progressed through taking his classes, and I was taking 3 classes a week at all different levels that he was teaching, and then would cycle around and take them again and again and again. But at one point, the universe was shoving me in the direction of being an astrologer, actually a practicing astrologer, to the point where almost daily, as I was driving to the bookstore, some car would move into my lane, shoving me out of the way, shoving me onto a different path. I mean, it was everywhere. And so the universe conspired. As much as I was resistant, there were a lot of other events I won't go into that were quite fated that led me in that direction. And so there was just some other force pushing me in that direction. I don't think it was I'm going there to be an astrologer. But in terms of doing astrology and having, the background and doing, whether I was going to be a professional astrologer or not, evolutionary astrology was the one that spoke to me. Mm-hmm. And what I was getting to, I think in my convoluted way, is through over the years, being around so many different forms of astrology, listening to lectures, reading different books, and reading through some of the modern traditional, not the classic ancient, because that wasn't around yet, but even the modern traditional, and closing up the book going, that's just dumb. That's I know.
That's just dumb.
Well, it's true. I mean, they would make such flat
descriptive astrology, right?
Yes, it was just like, are you kidding me? That's supposed to, no.
Yeah, so, well, the powerful thing about EA is that it helps answer the question why something happened, or why something is happening. Like what was happening to you was so fated. It was like a undercurrent of energy that was keeping you on this path.
Well, right? Apparently it was. I don't have, I certainly have zero regrets where my life has gone. I consider myself deeply blessed by my mother and by Jeffrey and the gifts they gave me. I was gifted that from them. I wasn't, I had at my disposal to do all those classes without charge, to access books at any time, to listen to lectures, to go to conferences and do things. And it was just, I tagged along for the ride, it seemed to me in the beginning, and just incredibly blessed. I can't even begin to tell you.
I agree. You are blessed. You were blessed then. And it's a wonderful feeling to reach this point in your journey and to be able to really relish in all that time and to feel so much gratitude. Because when you're in the process and when you're learning all this, all that you need to learn in this work, the depth that it brings and offers, and as we evolve, as we age, as we go through life, doesn't it take on a whole nother level of meaning for you?
It just all does. I mean, everything truly does. The whole time frame through beginning my studies, the transits I was going through at the time, the deeper times of not just in 83 when I really started, but the transits that went forward. I was approaching my Saturn return. There was Uranus and Neptune transiting through all of that, and as it was coming up. Nonetheless, the downloads that I had that were triggered by Jeffrey, in the sense that he would, in class, he would send us home with the option to meditate. I was never a writer, and homework was really a struggle for me, but he would send us home to meditate on just the homework. And so I would do that, and that was easier for me. And so just all the intuitive information that tended to rush in and over time, and that is not to say that I didn't know my foundational elements of astrology, but what grew from that was a far more intuitive process of growing the archetypes. And Jeffrey and I don't know if he'll remember, but we used to play a game together, and I would ask him a question, and I can't remember some of them really, but I would ask him a question about something, and he would ask me to imagine what the answer would be. And so I would close my eyes and imagine, and just again, the most amazing stuff would come out or come up, into my brain, and so it's something that he triggered. And of course, just all the silly and fun times that we had in the bookstore day in and day out, in between his clients, and all the phenomenal conversations that we all had, Mom and Jeffrey and Shar and I, just these deep philosophical, spiritual, astrological conversations that we'd all debate or have our opinions. And it was like a Shangri-La. It was this bubble of incredible energy that was going on there.
Energy, for sure. And connection, and
Yes.
souls circling back. And in particular, the day he walked into the store and seeing your mom and recognizing her. We all have that experience in our lives when we meet people for the first time and we're thinking, do I know you? That's what I love about astrology so much, or evolutionary astrology, that really supports all this intuitive energy that we carry, or emotional connection we feel with people. It's just so validating when we can see the symbols in the chart. You said something earlier, which I want to come back to, because I know a lot of people struggle with what you did initially, and I did too, which is, oh my gosh, this is so hard. This is so much. Am I ever going to get this? Am I ever going to be able to figure this out? And you quit and came back to it, and you quit and came back to it. And then timing is everything, really. But this work will always bring you back to it. When your soul is ready for the journey, it will bring you back to it. So thank you for sharing that, because I think people listening are going to be happy to know that even someone like you, wanted to throw in the towel early on.
And this is what I tell my students all the time. Look, I mean this in all sincerity. If I can do it, you
I love that. I say that a lot too, Laura. I absolutely say that a lot too.
And I know how hard it is.
Mm-hmm.
I know it is not something you just pick up a book and then all of a sudden you're an astrologer. It takes work.
Yeah, it does. It takes reading. It takes reading after reading after reading, because every reading is different. Every soul is different. Even if you're staring at the same charts of two souls born within minutes apart, as twins, for example, those souls have different past lives, everything else. And so it is really about feeling into that soul's experience. And every time, it's like a kaleidoscope of energy. There's more color, more pieces that come together when you are an astrologer for others. And that's what I love about this work too. I'm never bored with it. Every time I talk to someone, it's a different conversation. I grow so much too every time I'm working with a client and or tutoring a student, as you, I know as well, feel the same way. It is such a joy. It is such an honor. We are blessed, for sure.
And I think it takes a great amount of courage and willingness, because the courage it takes to look within, because I'll paraphrase Dane Rudger. He said that you can't go any deeper into someone else's chart than you've gone into your own. And I've always said this in terms of evolutionary astrology, you can't go any deeper into anyone else's soul than you've gone into your own. So you have to be willing to dive. You have to be willing to look. You have to be willing to question. You have to be willing to turn over the painful rocks and look what's underneath. You have to do that so that you can be present with other people looking at their charts.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there is a sense of needing to feel ready, although maybe in some cases we're never feeling ready to look at the stuff that's hard. But There's a quote I heard once that was, when the pain becomes greater than the fear,
It's
when
true.
the pain of not being you, naturally you, authentically you, becomes greater than the fear of what you're going to see when you do look back or turn over that rock.
Well,
It,
that leads me to something I now have to share with you.
okay.
Around that time, as I was heading into my Saturn return and facing a lot of stuff within myself, a mantra came up. Fear causes resistance. Resistance causes pain. And that used to be my mantra. And then Patricia Walsh added 2 more lines to it a few years ago. So I made something for my wall and it says, fear causes resistance. Resistance causes pain. Pain causes awareness, and awareness causes healing.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So my mantra back then was fear causes resistance. Resistance causes pain. Look at the pain. If you don't like the pain, then you're going to have to face the fear. And so that was my journey.
Wow. Beautiful. Beautifully said. I love it. I love all the pieces. And then it comes full circle with the healing, which is Pisces. You know, we're all on our way around that zodiac, ultimately making our way back to the sea. So before we move on to your talk, I did want to share this chart. Let's see here. This was the day. Laura's talk or lecture on in October will be on skip steps, which is a favorite topic for both of us because we both have some pretty serious ones. I can laugh about it, but definitely something we've both been working on this entire lifetime, and many lives sometimes when you have a skip step. But Saturn, at this Saturn return, there's Jeffrey's chart on his to the minute of his Saturn return, August 15th. This is 47 years ago. Do I have my math right? 46 years ago?
Well, 76 plus 47 is 20. It should be 2023.
Okay. All right. Anyway, this is definitely an anniversary.
Yeah.
At the day that we are having this conversation together. So Saturn was squaring the nodes in the sky. You can see Saturn at 8 Leo squaring South Node in Taurus, North Node in Scorpio here. So he was at this karmic intersection. It was a fated moment, And Laura, before we got online here, you were also pointing out that Venus in his 10th house, it's a relationship planet, but it's also career and a career position, was squaring his nodal axis as well. I definitely see this as your mom being a key relationship for bringing him into his work and into his life's work and destined work.
Yeah, but it's all over the chart. Even if you think at a simpler level, you see the ascendant of the transit that day at 14 Scorpio, almost exactly conjuncts Jupiter. Venus, the ascendant of that at that moment, roughly would have been conjunct his Venus there. So there's just a lot of connections going on. You pointed out the Pluto conjunct Neptune, trine his North Node. So there's a number of things going on here. Sun at the top of the chart.
So I'll take it a step back. Jeffrey has moon squaring the nodes as a skip step. A skip step is when a planet is squaring the nodal axis. So 17 Pisces squaring South Node in Sag, North Node in Gemini. The moon is family of your family, your mother. It means many things, but in his context, it reflects the sudden loss of his family in his most recent life, Maggie being his mother. And so with Pluto, which rules so many things in this chart, rules the whole chart with the Scorpio rising, Pluto is conjunct Neptune, which rules the moon in Pisces. So there's the fated day of re-meeting with his mother from another life and trining that North Node, which leads to a future together, working together, picking up where they left off. Powerful day.
Yeah, and the emotional trauma that the soul experienced is also, just to point out to everybody, reaffirmed a number of ways in his natal chart. Uranus square the moon. Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius on the 4th house, ruled by Uranus square the moon. Those are reaffirmations of that emotional trauma signature that the soul is carrying.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for bringing that up. And I do remember him saying something about either getting shot in the back or an arrow in the back. I mean, white man coming in to the Indian tribe they probably did have a bullet, not an arrow, but you can see that with the moon also squaring Mars and T-square to Mars and Uranus. So his sudden ending, sudden death.
Mhm.
And the moon in this context usually means when you're younger, teenager, late teens, potentially. I don't know exactly, but I know he was a younger warrior when he lost his life. So amazing to see that moon square Uranus, like you said, the trauma, unresolved trauma that he comes into this life with, not only linked with his mother, but he said too that he watched his wife be killed in front of him. I think his wife and his child in that life. So there's a huge trauma signature here, coming back into this life to heal the past. Wow. On that day, again, a very big day. I'm so glad you brought up that he was standing there in his military fatigues with those boots, those big boots that I'm sure he had on, and oh yes, I do remember long hair, beard. That would probably be intimidating to most people at that time.
It was very intimidating. He intimidated the crap out of me.
Oh yeah, even without the beard. But he is also probably the sweetest, kindest, most compassionate soul I have ever met in this lifetime for sure. So it's this combination between intensity and compassion that
Yeah.
a rare combination.
And I would say that, being young, I was certainly intimidated, but after getting to know him, you're right. Funny,
Very
kind,
funny.
very funny, very funny.
A great sense of humor. I
Yes.
think, he used to say too, if I wasn't a Sag, I'd be dead by now. So, just being willing to laugh at the hard stuff, the tough stuff, the
Yep.
stuff that nearly took you out. I mean, if we can't laugh in life, I mean, what is there? It's just a direct hit on the nervous system. It helps us relax a little bit and put things in perspective. So thank God for his sense of humor too. As we evolve, we all need that. So at the hairpin turns. All right, I'm going to just come back to you now. And so this October, as I mentioned, you're going to be doing a talk on skip steps. And you said, when we asked you, what do you want to talk on? You said, well, my favorite subject is the skip steps. So we're like, it's yours. Go for it. Why is that your favorite?
For me, in the EA material, in the EA paradigm, the skip step material is so resonant that I get the most intense responses from clients who have skip steps. To me, it is visceral, demonstrative. The from my very logical linear brain, there is a very step-by-step process of not only delineation of the nodal axis and the planets square the nodes, but the resolution and where the soul is going and all of that. And when I really began to understand, I have Mercury square the nodes. And when I really began to understand how the nodal axis, when you have a planet square the nodal axis, there's a lot of like teeter-totter back and forth between the north and south node throughout lifetimes. And I have to tell you, I always thought early on, before I really grasped the concept, that my soul had tended to overpolarize. What I mean by that is I have a first house Pluto with a south node in Aries, really strong soul orientation to the warrior, old violence, all of that. And my way, the highway, dominate everything. But in this lifetime, as I look, I watched myself, particularly in relationships, over acquiesce. I was polarizing over to the Libra and really not understanding why that was happening. And there really wasn't, and it wasn't until I really began to integrate the planet square the node, and the planet itself always made sense, right? It makes sense that I have Mercury square the nodes. And the stories I've been able to tell people about my Mercury square the nodes. But I really began to see how my soul had been teeter-tottering between past lives of dominance and past lives of acquiescence or over-compromising or trying to accommodate and wanting to be liked and back into conflict, and then back into avoidance of conflict, back into conflicts. And even in this lifetime, at just flip-flopping between those two dynamics of overcompensating and trying to appease and avoiding conflict. I still do it, avoiding conflict where I perceive I have the most to lose, and then going into fight or flight mode of the South Node in Aries. Right. And so I just think every time I do a reading, I watch my clients' eyes start to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the things they say to me almost consistently is, I've never had anyone tell me that in my life. Why has no one ever said this to me before? Why have so many other astrologers missed this?
Exactly. Because they weren't doing evolutionary astrology.
No, they weren't doing evolutionary astrology.
Hopefully they weren't evolutionary astrologers,
No, they weren't. They weren't.
To skip steps. And for those people that have never heard of skip steps, I'm assuming people listening have, but it really is a place where we get pinned in prior lives, a place we get stuck, just like you're talking about, flip-flopping back and forth between extremes at times. And it can take lifetimes to work through that. Not just one life, it can take lifetimes to work through that, because it is resistance, right? There is fear of expressing yourself, even with Mercury square in the nodes, not in speaking, but in writing. Right?
All of it.
Resistance.
Yeah. And I think that you've got, for me, when I'm doing and delineating and reading a chart with a planet square the nodes, there's two things that I'm reading. One is the nature of that pendulum swing between the North and the South node off the pivot point of the planet square the nodes, right? And then given whatever planet or planets, because often it can be more than one. I've had up to clients who've had up to 5 planets square the nodes. And so, yeah. And so I have a sibling who has 1, 2, I think she has 4 or 5 planets square the nodes. And each of those planets then becomes a point to discuss what issues are we dealing with. And when we talk about the nature of a skip step, is that for whatever reason, and to me, the reason is irrelevant. For whatever reason, the soul either attempted to move on or wasn't able to complete what it was needing to complete. And so the step was skipped, or some pieces were skipped. I've often used the analogy of a puzzle, that when you have a planet square the nodes, it's like, okay, if you have Mars square the nodes, you have this Mars puzzle. If you also have Saturn square the nodes, you have a Saturn puzzle. And so you've got part of the puzzle put together. It does indicate work has been done, right? But there are some key pieces that are missing that brings it all together. And there can be different parts of the puzzle. For me, the speaking piece came together early, not too long after my Saturn return. And I think it was when Saturn and Neptune went over Mercury. And so that was a crisis point that forced a resolution of verbal communication, which I really was not good at. And so the piece about writing, I have worked at it and written personal things, narrative stories, poems, that sort of thing. But in terms of writing something and putting into the public sphere, that is a hurdle too far so far.
Well, I mean, and I don't even know that it was part of the plan this time, right?
I'm willing to accept that it's not.
I don't think you have to come back with Mercury squaring the nodes again, Laura, just because that didn't happen. I mean, you've run circles around so many people by expressing yourself in other ways, through your voice, through your teaching, through your readings and everything else. So I think you're good. And I read somewhere something like 75 to 80% of people who start to write a book never finish it. So, you're good.
Yeah, I really feel, I would say in all truth, I feel 80%, 85% good about it. There's a little part that says, the Mercury and Capricorn that says should, ought.
Yeah.
And also the part of me that wants to overcome, accomplish, I mean, there's all my old stuff that's in there, but I would say the vast majority of me is okay. I figure I've done a lot of work and I'm good with that.
So I'm gonna ask you this. I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Okay.
In EA, we talk about Mars, which is your South Node and Aries ruler, and you do have a first house Pluto, but Mars is the lead point in our evolution. So Mars is a planet of desire and choice making. So I'm going to ask you this question. Do you want to write?
No.
So it's
Yes.
not part of the plan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really about desire and
Yeah.
what you want. I mean, you've accomplished so much already. I know right now you want to spend time with your grandkids and rest a little, chill. You've definitely worked plenty. And so you've earned that. So I think for that 15% to be okay with it, just remind yourself, I don't want it. So if you don't want it, then it's 100%, you're good. I'll tell you what, I do have a skip step too, that I pray to God I do not come back with Saturn squaring the nodes. That's been a doozy.
I'll take Mercury over Saturn. Thank you very much.
I have Mercury retrograde on my South node, so it's very similar to a skip step. And
yes, it is.
We often say it's about recovering your voice, and that's what you've done big time. The other thing that I love about skip steps, and I know you're going to teach about this, but we can tell how long a soul's been working on something, whether this planet that's squaring the nodes is moving into the square or out of the square, right? By degrees. So if somebody's just coming into a square and it's just approaching that square, it's the beginning. But if somebody is
like that,
I know I don't like to tell a client that if I see that, but if it's on the way out, which mine's like 6 degrees beyond the square. So I feel like, okay, that's pretty good. But you really at 10 degrees beyond the square, that's the maximum point.
No, mine are applying. I have Mercury at 10 and the nodes at 16. So as the node gets smaller into Aries and Mercury goes further into Capricorn, they're applying, not separating.
But I feel like you've completely covered so much ground in this lifetime. So that's when you were born. So think about how much you've chipped into that. That's how much you have really dealt with that square. But
I do feel it has and let's talk about the resolution node for men, because I think that's really important. So if all of you are listening, and you were looking at a chart and you stand on the planet that's squaring the nodes and you look to the center of the chart. So you're standing on the planet, you're looking to the center of the chart itself. The node on the left of that planet is the resolution node. So that means this is the facilitation node.
Right.
And so just as an example, if my old way was to try to approach that, I felt more comfortable in the South node, go it alone, fight my way through, fight or flight. I could either go in there and charge in or go away, right?
Yeah.
But the facilitation and resolution node is the North node in Libra. And so the resolution and facilitation was actually engaging in conversation with other people and working better at listening, and as well as listening to myself, and how to engage in a real good give and take without having to get defensive or, get angry or whatever it might be. So there's lots of experiences in my life working in the bookstore, having people come in who were rather rabid on the Christian side, or Scientologists that would come in and challenge us. I would get super defensive and overly aggressive. And it finally took another Scientologist coming into the bookstore who started yelling at me, telling me that we were bad and wrong for providing everybody with too many choices. There should be one option, people a sense of security, And there shouldn't be all these options for people to choose from. Just creates confusion and chaos. And I looked at him and I said, I really think it's wonderful that you found yours.
There you go.
Wonderful that you found yours and that it makes sense to you. We're here for people who don't know yet. And they're going to come in here and look through these books, and eventually something's going to ring for them the way what you have found rings for you. And it left him kind of speechless, and he turned around and walked out. And about 3 months later, he came into the bookstore, found me, and said, I'm interested in looking.
Oh my,
what do you recommend?
Love that story.
Isn't that great?
What did you recommend to him?
I don't remember. It was so long ago.
Oh, that is
it
just
would have been on the metaphysical spiritual side, because that's where he was questioning, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't interested in astrology. It was, defining the meaning of the universe, and Scientology had defined it so clearly and so concretely and had very clear and defined margins and rules. That's where he had felt safe. And so I may have talked to him about trusting his instincts. And I really worked at listening and what he was saying. So there was an engagement and a dialogue, and he picked up a book or two and walked out and bought them and walked out with them.
That was an evolutionary leap, Laura.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. The same thing would have happened to me. I would have been triggered by somebody like that, especially with my religious upbringing. But
yeah, well, South Node in Aries in the 9th. Are you kidding me?
Oh, right. Okay.
I'm ready to pull out. Normally, I would have been ready to pull out my sword. I mean, it's probably scared a lot of people who would come in but the Christians would come in and yell at us that we're going to hell, or some of them would come in and sucker me into conversation, ask me a question about a book. What's this? What's that? And then they go for the kill shot. Tell me I'm going to hell. I'm the spawn of the devil. And I would just get triggered and lose my ever loving.
That's an awesome story. I love it. Another way I see your Mercury squaring the nodes and some of the other symbols in your chart is the way that you and your North Node in Libra, how you promote so many other voices, like with Norwalk and I mean, all over the map, not just evolutionary astrology. Norwalk has astrologers from different branches over all the years. So you've been very Libran that way, and you've had this diversity within your world that supports all voices. There are many paths to the one, right? Seven paths, 7 chakras, 7 candles, 7 churches, I think it says. So you were a real supporter and promoter of other voices, other people. And that to me is a big piece of the resolution for your skip step too.
I think that's really cool. I like the way you put that. And thinking about my North Node in Libra in the 3rd house, ruled by a Venus in Aquarius in the 6th. So even more diversity, applying that. I mean, I have been a huge advocate for diversity of thought. I am not an advocate of putting one form of astrology above another or down. I've heard people, slam evolutionary astrology or modern psychological astrology. I've certainly read on social media. I try not to read too much because it does get my blood to boil a little bit. And then even conversely, watching the combats within even the traditional community as they fight amongst themselves for a particular thought about, a house system or whatever it might be. And I'm just like, my North Node in Libra with the Venus ruler and Aquarius, I just don't get it. And so even after the last kerfuffle in the traditional community at the last Norwalk, I sent an email out to the speakers and I said, do not bring this conversation or this fight to my conference.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah.
We are here together, and we are community. We can hold different thoughts and different opinions and different viewpoints. And it does not make anyone right or wrong. It's just a different view, a different lens, and it's okay. EA is my lens. It's just the lens I look through. It is for me like, again, I've tried so many different techniques over the years. Sometimes I've found ways to incorporate some of those techniques into evolutionary astrology tangentially. Sometimes I do see the value of traditional astrology, but I see traditional astrology as what I call exterior astrology, and evolutionary is what I call interior astrology. And I'd rather gaze into the interior of the soul and why the individual has manifested and incarnated in this lifetime and why they're meant to be here than into what or when something may particularly happen in their lives, or looking at just personality traits and designating something in detriment or fall or exaltation. I think those things in evolutionaries, there's nothing wrong with them in the way that they're applied, I suppose, for those folks. Doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just doesn't. It's not the language. It's not the dialect I speak. I've often said that, there's many different ways using an analogy is that, astrology is a language. What's your dialect? It all serves as a point of communication.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, I want to communicate deeper elements of the soul. And after doing a podcast with Chris Brennan on Neptune, and we spent 2 hours delving into this. It's just an incredible experience of entering into this Neptunian realm. Traditional students were watching it and then reaching out to me for a reading, and they'd never had I can't tell you how many readings I did for people who were much more interested in traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology, than had a reading from me and became interested in evolutionary astrology.
It goes a bit deeper, getting into the center of, and again, why life, why this relationship, why that experience. The why is a Plutonian word. And that's where we start with this work with Pluto. And as I was listening to you too, Laura, while we do look at the paradigm, Pluto, and of course the skip steps, if there's a skip step, we go there first, Pluto, and then the skip step. You can't go to a polarity point of Pluto until you've dealt with the skip step. Think about that. We cannot go to the polarity of our soul until it's like there's a barricade in the way. And I don't think you know this. Maybe you know this, or maybe you'll remember this, but I'm almost certain that your Amazon, the asteroid Amazon, which is the female warrior, is in Libra. And
I have Pallas Athena.
Yeah, and Amazon, the actual asteroid Amazon. I think I
haven't looked at the actual asteroid, but I know I have Pallas Athena, who I use as the champion of the just and right cause. She's righteous in her cause, right? She has a warrior element to her. So I have Pallas Athena conjunct the North Node in Libra as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think your Amazon's there too. I looked before the show.
I'll have to look at it.
So of course, Pallas Athena is an Amazon warrior in mythological terms, but I just feel like, sometimes what will happen is because ultimately, even though you have this warrior energy, this natural leadership energy, this first house Pluto, you are a warrior for peace. And so you want peace among people. You don't want, that's why the extremes were happening for you, between fighting for it and acquiescing, fighting for it and acquiescing. And I think for all of us, we've all come here to fight for something. It doesn't mean we're carrying a spear. Maybe we're a warrior for our own growth, right? Or for truth, or for love. But we need that fighter spirit in us, right? In order to really, it takes courage to evolve. It takes real courage to tackle that skip step. So are there any specific planets? Do you love them all? Or
I do. I don't know that it really matters to me. I've done them all, throughout the years. I don't think there's ever been a planet that I have not seen in a skip step. They're all different because they have signs that are different. They're rulers, a planetary ruler. The dispositor is different. The nodal axis may be different. The context is different based on Pluto, where it's at in the chart. So just like you said earlier, I never get bored.
No,
right?
There's countless combinations.
Oh, there's just countless combinations. And they're always just so fascinating. And they just come alive for me, right? The whole chart just comes alive. and I can see things. I can see the connections. I have a firm grounding in the mechanics of astrology, but I allow that intuition and imagination to expand and see beyond and see how the combinations can make interesting story. And so, by the way, the other thing about my Mercury is it's out of bounds. That Mercury square the nodes is out of bounds. And so I often think of it's not one of those things that is a primary or even direct EA methodology, but it's one of those things that I've sort of brought in from other traditions. And I can see where, it operates in a Uranian way, right? We talk about retrogrades operating in a Uranian way, going their own way, breaking and bucking the system in their own way. Planets out of bounds have to do that as well. Either they're doing it, and it again depends on the aspects to the planet, but it is trying to break the bounds or has broken the bounds of consensus or normal, or what might be considered normal behavior for the soul. It's trying to break free. So there's an element to that can be applied there as well. And
multiple combinations, like you said, and that gives that Mercury for you an added emphasis of the needing to return, right? To listen to your own thoughts, own voice, own soul. And even the Mercury in terms of the diversity of study that you've had. Look at the store that you were working with, countless books and things you could have picked up at your fingertips. Free classes, everything, the information that was coming in, and you had to come up with your version of the truth.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, that was what this life is about.
I mean, that is a thing. I remember it would have been 1986, 87. It would have been 86. I was carrying on a study group of the students that we had been in Jeffrey's classes. And the last classes I did, this group carried on after we'd finished the Pluto work and done some other classes or workshops with Jeffrey. We carried on and did this study group. And I had just that fall begun to teach my very first class. And it was just on archetypes. It wasn't anything big. It was just teaching planet signs and houses. The first class was a disaster, and not by my own judgment. I invited a friend to come sit in on the class who knew something about astrology, but I knew she'd be honest. And she's the one that told me it was, that wasn't good. And then she said, but good news is, here's what you can do about it. And so she gave me some really constructive feedback, which was super, super important to the trajectory of my teaching. And so she just said, what do you think? Because I was quoting Jeffrey, and I was quoting my mother, and I was quoting, Joanne Wickenburg and any other number of astrologers. And she said, if I wanted a recitation of what other astrologers thought, I would just probably go read the books, right? She goes, what do you think? What are your thoughts? What do you think this means? And so that was really a spark at that moment. Again, these faded kind of moments. And the other one was in the study group, a student came back and came into town, and he said, can I come tonight for the study group? And in that study group, we were doing aspects and phases, and just so happened that we were doing my Uranus-Mercury gibbous phase, gibbous quincunx. And so everybody was kind of doing an interpretation of it, giving me their thoughts. And this guy said to me in the class, in front of everybody, to a Mercury Capricorn, you have no original thought. You are just a parrot of your mother and Jeffrey.
Wow.
The next day I had laryngitis out of the blue. I lost my voice.
This is amazing. This is crazy.
Isn't it crazy? I lost my voice for 3 days.
Oh my goodness.
Spun in on myself, analyzing, crisis, Uranus, Mercury, quincunx, just full on. And by the third day, my voice came back, and my voice came back. I went through the crisis. He did me the greatest service, as painful as it was to be embarrassed and shamed in front of people. That was my story. That I came through the other side knowing my own voice, that I chose to believe me. I chose. Yes, I was taught by Jeffrey. Everything that I know at that point came from Jeffrey and my mother. They were my start. They were my teachers, granted. But I didn't have to live in the fear that I had nothing of value and that I had no authority of my own voice.
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you shared this story, because that Mercury, as your skip step, it rules Virgo naturally and Gemini, but Virgo, which you talked about, the crises that had to happen. So this is a perfect example. That next day, I'm sure you're thinking, oh my God, why did my soul create this? I can't even talk. I have laryngitis. This is what we teach in EA, to look at these events in our life and ask why. And then through the gibbous phase in conjunct to Uranus, which is the higher octave of Mercury, and the planet of original thought, the planet of innovation and ingenuity. And these two form a gibbous in conjunct to create a crisis, to throw you into your own south node again, which is your truth, believing in yourself. It is just fantastic. I mean, this is EA in action. I just love it.
And Mercury's the ruler of my Pluto, and Pluto trines back to the Mercury. And so I just had to find it. Yeah. And I had to go through the Virgoan gibbous quincunx crisis to break the cycle of doubt of the past. Did that mean I knew everything? Hell no.
No. Yeah. Oh, that was just an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, we are thrilled to have you with us at this conference coming up. Of course, we need the veteran there. We need the girl who was there at the beginning and all the way through. Here you still stand. You're still doing this work. You're still helping others do this work. You are shining a light on the path for those that are growing into this work. So thank you, Goddess bless you for that. And I look very forward to your talk in October.
I'm excited. This is going to be a great conference. So I'm definitely excited, and for the tribe to get back together, get the tribe together and let's get it out there.
Yeah, we are bringing everybody back from our conference, from our last live conference in Port Townsend, which must have happened like 8 or 9 years ago. I can't remember exactly now.
It was outside of Portland. It was in the Meadow.
Port Townsend. Thank you. Still Meadows, not Port Townsend.
Still Meadows. That was it. Still Meadows.
Yeah. So we had a live conference and we're bringing everybody back with a few new voices. Sweet. So yeah, bringing back the tribe. And we just welcome everybody. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for creating the space for us all to be there. So it's amazing.
It warmed my soul to the core. All right. Well, we'll see you in a few months.
Yep.
Until next time. Namaste.